Rapid Reaction APEC South Korea 2025. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jonathan Corrado, and I'm the Policy Director here at the Korea Society.
And I'm Chelsie Alexandre, the Policy Program Officer here at the Korea Society. We're delighted to welcome you for our second conversation about the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum 2025 Summit in Gyeongju, South Korea.
And Chelsie showing some fortitude by coming today despite having a little bit of a sore throat. So thank you, Chelsie. We're grateful to be joined by three terrific speakers who are going to help us unpack all the storylines around the summit and the sideline meetings. It came down to the final hours, but in the end, the Gyeongju Declaration was adopted along with an initiative on artificial intelligence and a framework for addressing demographic change. Of course, the headlines were taken by President Trump's summits with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and Chinese President Xi Jinping, both of which led to trade deals. This was Xi's first visit in 11 years, and it was also a debut of sorts for Japan's new prime minister. There's so much action, so much to unpack, and we have the perfect panel to do it.
Yeah, so first up, a warm welcome back to Kate Kalutkiewicz, Senior Managing Director of the Trade Practice at McLarty Associates and former Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for International Trade at the National Economic Council. Thanks for joining us again, Kate.
So Kate joined us back on October 23rd for the first program in this series, which was kind of a forecast, what's going to happen. And so now, Kate, you get to revisit what you said and think about how the outcomes have fared in comparison to the expectations. So looking forward to that, Kate. Thank you for joining us.
That's right. There's lots of twists and turns to unravel today. So we are very happy to welcome next Professor Jaemin Lee, Professor of Law at Seoul National University and Dean of the School of Law. Thank you for joining us, Professor Lee.
And Professor Lee, you're the only one on this panel who's actually in Korea. So in addition to hearing your scholarly academic analysis, we're interested to hear about the atmosphere there in Korea. How is it all unfolding?
Absolutely. And finally, we're very happy to welcome Scott Jacobs, Head of Global Public Policy at Coupang. We're really looking forward to the special and valuable perspective you'll be able to provide. So thank you for joining us, Scott.
And there's so much to learn, so much to discuss. We first want to thank the Korea Foundation, the APEC Study Center at Columbia University, our corporate sponsors, and our individual members for their generous support, which makes this program possible.
Yep, and I want to give another reminder that we're welcoming your questions live. So please send those throughout the program to policy@koreasociety.org. After the moderated discussion, we'll convey your questions to our expert panel here, and we've collected a few, but please keep bringing those over. And so I think with that, we're ready to jump right in. So Jonathan, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Chelsie. And let's get cracking here. Professor Lee, let's start with you. The big headline, what's your takeaway from the summit?
Well, the summit meeting between President Trump and President Lee, I think it went largely well. Well, we know the difficulty of this particular meeting. Two countries have endured a grueling negotiation for the past several months. And now, finally, last week, they reached a deal. We understand that the deal is very complex and they are still struggling to elaborate the details. So there's still a long way to go. And Jonathan, as you said, this is particularly true for the maxim that the devil lies in the details. So there's a long way to go. That said, I think it's very critical that the two countries have finally reached a deal at this particular point in time. I think as long as the two countries can manage to find a way to implement what is agreed upon, I think it may be a good pathway for the future alliance of Korea and the United States. It includes shipbuilding cooperation. It includes the economic security type cooperation, and it also enhances mutual two-way investment in Korea and the United States. Of course, this particular deal focuses on Korea's massive investment in the United States, but at the same time, the increased two-way interaction economically between the two countries will also usher in enhanced U.S. investment in Korea as well. So we will see this a good stepping stone for the enhanced economic cooperation between the United States and Korea. But at the same time, there's a still ongoing debate in Korea about how to fund the $200 billion from Korea and how to fund the $20 billion each year for this promise. So there's a long way to go. And the two countries need to continue to cooperate and continue to discuss the details. But this is the beginning of a new type of economic cooperation. So we'll have to see.
Thank you so much. A great way to get started. A positive outlook from you, Professor Lee. And you mentioned there that there's this 20 billion per year cap on how much will go into the investment fund. And that's one of the ways that the two sides was able to address this problem of this massive investment posing some potential problems for the won, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. And we can get into a lot more of those details. So great way to set the foundation for us. Now we're going to pivot over to Kate. So Kate, what's the big headline for you?
The big headline for me was that the White House wanted deals and the White House left with deals. I mean, I think that this was a very positive thing for South Korea, because I think going into it, I think we talked about this a few weeks ago in our preview, it was very uncertain what the outcome was going to be. And I think the success that the White House was enjoying leading up to that summit, I think created, a very positive environment for them to reach some terms. As Professor Lee said, the devil's in the details, but this is not a detail-oriented White House. This is a headline-oriented White House. So I think at the end of the day, South Korea can interpret this much in the way that it wants. I think it's going to want to get some clarity on tariff rates, of course, but when we're talking about these investment commitments, and whether anyone in the White House is responsible for double checking to make sure they're all made on schedule, I think there will be probably a bit more flexibility than all of us would like, but that's the outcome in this environment.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Kate. And now, Scott, I want to pivot to you because you have a really special perspective, and I'm glad you were able to join us today. Hoping you could tell us a little bit more, first of all, about Coupang for our audience members who maybe don't know that much about it, and how have events this past week affected Coupang's business?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jonathan. It's great to be back at the Korea Society. Good to see my friend Kate and connect with Professor Lee. I think most of your viewers are familiar with our business, but maybe less so about some of the new developments and innovations that we've been prioritizing lately. So again, appreciate the opportunity. But as folks know, Coupang is a U.S. technology company. We're a Fortune 150 business. We're headquartered in Seattle, right down the street from Microsoft and Amazon and a handful of other global tech firms. Listed on the New York Stock Exchange, corporate offices across North America and Europe and Asia. But, at this point, really a highly diversified Amazon-style business, that provides a variety of services, including retail and restaurant and fresh grocery delivery and video streaming and fintech services. We recently announced that we've expanded into cloud storage services through our Coupang Intelligence Cloud business. So offering GPU as a service and now serving customers through all of our subsidiaries in about 190 countries and territories worldwide, but always with a particular focus on APEC markets, but really also including the heart of our business, where we've really prioritized growth and investment, and that's of course in Korea. And so this year, we were ranked number 2 on Fast Company's list of the most innovative companies in the world. Largely for the ways that we've embraced, things like AI and machine learning and advanced robotics throughout our operations. And now, as we look forward as a business, really focused on, forging partnerships to deploy, American-led AI, American technology throughout Korea and all the markets in which we operate. And, to date, we've devoted many billions of dollars to develop all these technologies throughout the region, and more than $3 billion in Korea alone over the past 3 years to expand these services. And we were proud to announce that publicly in Gyeongju last week during the CEO summit. So just to give you a quick sense of how the AI story integrates into our business, we're deploying it in a variety of ways throughout our logistics operations, to first and foremost, help us predict, what customers want based on their history or their geographic location, determining the most efficient path for our customers' order. So helping guide our delivers, our delivery station employees, our drivers, to help them maximize time saved throughout the entire process. And then, things like automating the storage process in our warehouses, throughout the country by using things like driverless forklifts and sorting robots. And so all of this enables us to provide services that, customers, including, of course, in Korea, really love about the business. Our Dawn delivery guarantee, for example, where if you order virtually anything on the site, whether it be an iPhone or fresh groceries or a toothbrush, if you order all that before midnight, it'll be on your doorstep by 7 a.m. And so that's how we're innovating every day. And largely because of the way that we've harnessed AI, we're now the #1 job creator in Korea, despite being a U.S. company. And why we can proudly say that we're the second largest employer in Korea, behind only Samsung, nearly about 100,000 workers throughout the business. And so it's also important to emphasize, though, that it's broad-based, inclusive growth, right? Our business, in investments, particularly in advanced logistics, are really driving growth across the entire Korean economy. So if you look at our small business partners, our logistics infrastructure, our delivery and fulfillment center employees, the vast majority of all of those are based outside of Seoul, including in rural areas. And so we now have more than 300,000 small business partners who, through Coupang, are able to access new customers, access new markets that they otherwise never would have been able to reach. And so we've really evolved into this true export engine, I think, for U.S. goods to Asia, and helping bring down trade deficits, help increase trade flows. We've been a leading source of U.S. FDI into Korea and Taiwan and other APEC markets, and taking billions of dollars of American products and American agriculture to customers in Korea and throughout the region each year. So, bringing U.S. innovation to APEC and to Korea, forging these sorts of tech partnerships is it not only is good for America's global AI leadership, but frankly, helps boost exports, especially U.S. produced goods, and most importantly, I think providing a ton of economic and social value in Korea. So continue to embrace our role as a company that is promoting all of that. And like I said, we were proud to be a prominent sponsor at the summit last week during President Trump's visit.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Scott. And artificial intelligence, of course, one of the two issues chosen by South Korea as the host nation to focus on. So we'll get a chance to unpack that a little bit further and how it impacts Coupang and other U.S. and Korean businesses. Okay, let's start with the APEC summit itself. There's a lot of sideline deals that went down, a lot of summitry and diplomacy on the sidelines, but I want to start with APEC. And so as a way to kind of evaluate whether we think it was a success or not, I wanted to start with the sentiment from Korean Foreign Minister Cho Hyun, who said that Korea's priority was to reaffirm the spirit of cooperation in Asia Pacific through strengthening connectivity via trade and investment, fostering digital innovation, and achieving sustainable and inclusive growth. And then, of course, Korea selected two issues to focus on. One was artificial intelligence, and the other one was demographic change, an issue that is affecting Korea quite dramatically. So using that as our measuring stick, knowing that that was Korea's aims for the summit, how successful do you think it was? And let's start with Professor Lee first.
Well, Jonathan, thank you. Well, I think my assessment of the APEC this time in Korea is I would put it as a mediocre success. So this is largely positive outcome from the APEC meeting last week. It would be better if they committed to multilateralism and they committed to free trade, etc. But as we know, that seems to be quite difficult at this particular point in time. So given what has been happening this year, I think this much it would be probably the best we could hope for. In that respect, the outcome of last week, particularly the Gyeongju Declaration, in which they at least to talk about the importance of trade and investment and how countries can benefit from trade and investment. That type of general discussion could be probably the best we could hope for. So in that respect, at least the 21 member economies have noted that we need to do something to turn around the current situation in a way that we can find some breakthrough. So that seems to be at least some development, again, given what has happened this year for the past 9 to 10 months. So largely, this is a good development. At least they seem to be on the same boat to think about these issues. Maybe they are agreeing to disagree, but I think that much is okay for now for us. So that is largely good development. At the same time, the two topics, which are artificial intelligence and demographic changes, are very important topics for Korea recently. As we know, Korea is suffering from very low and declining birth rates and the fast aging population. So demographic changes is an important topic for Korea, and artificial intelligence is the topic which is very critical to many countries, including Korea. So I think the two topics were purposefully selected by Korea, AI and demographic changes, in which Korea can contribute based upon its own struggles and its own experiences. So that way, Korea can probably lead the initiative on AI and demographic change discussions. So I think that is the reason why Korea particularly chose two topics, and then they decide to lead the discussions for those two topics. So hopefully, going forward, Korea can contribute and lead the discussions on the AI initiative aspect and also demographic shift aspects as well. So we'll have to see.
Great. Thank you so much, Professor Lee. And of course, APEC is a consensus-driven organization. So a single veto could have sunk the ability to publish the joint statement. So this required last-minute coordination, and you have to get the U.S., China, Russia, everybody on the same page on one. So this was a tremendously difficult task.
It is. You have to go as general as possible to get everybody on board, I think.
Kate, over to you. What are your thoughts? Is this perhaps a model for what multilateral trade meetings will look like going forward? How do you evaluate the APEC summit this year?
Well, I think what Professor Lee just said is indicative of maybe my views of things like APEC, which you have to go as general as possible to get agreement, right? These are not landmark driving details which change trajectory of the way that countries are going to regulate. So look, I mean, APEC, from a U.S. perspective, from a U.S. trade negotiator perspective, I was at USTR for many years. These organizations are very important, of course, as convening institutions, right? And I think if we look at it objectively in that vein, it was a huge success. But these are really not things that are driving policy, right? And I think what we saw come out of APEC, it's helpful. I mean, I'd be interested in Scott's views as someone from a leading digital company about whether these things actually matter to businesses. I suspect they don't, but at least as a positive trajectory, it's a good signal exercise. Now, this summit will be remembered for one thing, and that will be the U.S.-China discussion, which I know we'll get to. But by and large, I think this signal that the United States is ready for deals in Asia. This, I think, probably is the biggest headline, really, after we saw the Trans-Pacific Partnership fall apart. We saw the first Trump administration really launch its trade war with China. This is a much different moment. Of course, on the wake of Liberation Day and the massive changes that the United States and frankly, the Trump administration have brought to the multilateral trading system, this was a moment of, for me, optimism around where we might end up. Of course, we're going to have different tariff rates. We are going to have questionable relationships in bodies like APEC and the WTO. But by and large, we started to see some stabilization here, which I think is a huge success. And Korea, as the host nation, gets to take credit for that. This happened under its host year. I don't think anyone will remember what APEC did or didn't do, but they will remember that nothing blew up and that this was a positive outcome. That sounds like a low bar, but I mean, it is very concerning. I'm sure that the organizers were really worried about all these side meetings and what they might mean. And I think this will be remembered as one of the more important APEC summits, irrespective of what APEC actually did.
And if we view things from the Korean economy's point of view, the Kospi Index has been sent into new heights. So a lot of excitement from that point of view. Okay, so you teed up our discussion on the sideline trade deal. So let's dig into those. And Kate, we're going to start with you to talk about China and Japan if you'd like. But I know China is a big one. So if you just want to focus on that, that's all
well,
right.
I mean, I'd like to actually start with the earlier deals that were made in Malaysia, because those were also really important. And, you know, as a headline, I would say we are seeing a split between the types of trade deals that the U.S. is negotiating. And you can very clearly see which ones are being led by the U.S. Trade Representative and which are being led by Commerce. I'll start, frankly, with Malaysia and Cambodia, which were released earlier in the visit and which were very significant for their detail, largely the detail with respect to addressing China. So China is always in the background, no matter what we're talking about. And the deals with Malaysia and Cambodia put the most clear signaling in text as to what we can expect the U.S. to ask trading partners to do. And by and large, that is do what we're doing with China. If we raise tariffs on China, we're going to ask you to raise tariffs on China. If we take actions and export controls, we're going to ask you to mirror those. This is a very different approach from the first Trump administration, but it's one that we've seen in each of these agreements with varying levels of detail. This was the most detail that we've seen. And I think for trading partners that have not yet really negotiated full deals, this is what they should be expecting. So very significant. Japan obviously was a big success as well. I mean, I think in that respect, the expectations were optimistic because the prime minister and the president had already had a positive interaction. That detail, much like the Korea detail, was very, very focused on these investment deals. The Japan package, I think, allocated about 75% of those funding packages. We'll have to see how those go into effect, but very clear signaling to Korea as well about the types of investments the U.S. is looking for, the detail it's looking for, and also it's a two-way street. The U.S. is also prepared to invest in the other market, and this is a positive outcome, again, in terms of a bilateral relationship, which lends itself to positive outcomes for both sides. Before I get to China, I would also comment on the Australia deal that we had several weeks ago, which also is leading up to this China discussion. Much of what the U.S. is doing, I would say, is trying to rearrange a bit the risk board, if you will. You know, part of what's happening with the U.S. and China so far, and the reason why we have ended in this situation of, you know, status quo, you know, let's put new things on the table, let's take those things off the table, end up in status quo again. This is largely because, you know, neither side has had the opportunity to establish significant leverage over the other. I believe that the United States, with these deals with Australia on rare earths, with the packages in ASEAN, with the deals with Japan and South Korea, really trying to isolate China increasingly, really trying to shore up new sources for rare earths and critical minerals to release this chokehold that China keeps putting on the U.S. So all of these things leading into that discussion with Xi were so important, and I think, frankly, very successful. The Xi summit, you know, 12 out of 10. How can you do better than that? I mean, I think we're still not in a position where we can predict the final outcome of this ongoing saga. But I mean, I think that it's clear both sides do not want to decouple from one another. They are simply trying to figure out how to get the better of the other, make the other yield. We're not there yet. this was a positive summit, not only because we reestablished the status quo, we solved again in a temporary basis the rare earths and the export controls, but we made some concessions on soybeans, which the president had to deliver. The pressure in the U.S. was growing very, very loud, and a reduction in some of the fentanyl tariffs. So I think by and large, from a business standpoint, from an agriculture standpoint, this was a very positive outcome.
Thanks so much, Kate. And interested in your thoughts. I've seen some comments that President Trump's decision to not attend the APEC Leaders Summit opened the door for Chinese President Xi Jinping to kind of play a role there. But it seems like what you're saying is that all of these other deals created a leadership position for the U.S. to play in Asia that could perhaps counterbalance that. What's your assessment there?
Yeah, China likes to try to use these opportunities to establish some sort of leadership role. I don't think the other countries buy it. So, I mean, I'd be interested if you had somebody from one of those countries, or Professor Lee, what do you think? I think, other nations are happy to take part in photo ops, but at the end of the day, it's not about President Trump or President Xi, but it's about the power of the U.S. market, the long-term economic gains for remaining connected with the United States. So it's a much longer-term vision and not really a popularity contest.
Thanks, Kate. Okay, Professor Lee, over to you for this U.S.-Korea trade deal. What are your thoughts there? And we were hoping, crossing our fingers, that we would get a fact sheet that would tell us all of these terrific details about the nature of the agreement, but it looks like that's going to come out later this week. So we're getting little trickles and dribbles of information about what that's going to look like. So based on what you've seen thus far, what are your thoughts?
Well, on the issue of Korea-US deal, I think it's critical for Korea to receive the 15% tariff rates for its products, particularly the automobiles, because Korean automobile makers are competing, head to head with the Japanese competitors and the European competitors. So it's critical for Korea to receive 15% tariff rates for automobiles and other products as well. What was rather disappointing for Korea, it was expected, but still disappointing for Korea, was that the tariff rates for steel products still remained 50%. So that is reported as something frustrating in Korea. But other than that, the fact that Korea has received 15% tariff rates for its products, I think that's largely positive outcome for Korea at this particular juncture. But at the same time, Korea still remembers the old Korea-US FTA tariff rates, where many items were placed on 0% tariff rates. But those days are gone, so Korea is realizing it. So 50% is manageable for Korea at this time. At the same time, the critical question for now is, again, $200 billion investment, cash investment in the United States, and how to manage it, how to monitor it, and how to track down on it as we go along, at least for the next 10 years. So that will be a long process for Korea in implementing its own obligation vis-a-vis the United States. So that is being debated now, and that is why many people are watching the fact sheets and MOUs to be signed between two governments sometime soon. And once those documents are released, many people are watching closely on how the investment part is elaborated in future implementation part. So that is something we will have to watch keenly. And at the same time, as regards the Kate's point on the issue of President Trump's earlier departure from the APEC Leaders Summit meeting, well, it would have been better if President Trump had stayed longer in Korea and attended those APEC economic leaders meeting. But at the same time, I think he had made already his presence clear in Korea for 2 days. So he made his points clear. He made the presence of the United States clear at the meeting. So I think I will not see that much of difference from his earlier departure, given his meetings with Korean president and Chinese president, and all those remarks and all those his activities in Korea. So he has made the U.S. points clearer in Korea and to the audience of the APEC Leaders Summit meeting as well. So that may not have made big difference on that point.
Thanks
Thank you.
very much, Professor Lee. Another aspect that I saw come out this morning of the investment vehicle portion of the deal was that a lot of this money can first flow to Korean companies who have an active presence in the United States. So sort of similar to the host nation support that Korea pays for the presence of America's 28,500 soldiers, largely stationed around Pyeongtaek, but around the country as well. A lot of that money goes to Korean companies and Korean staff for their salaries to support the U.S. presence there. So just a way to make sure that Korea is also getting what it needs out of a mutually beneficial arrangement. So we're starting to see some aspects of it that help to make it possible, right? Because there was concerns from Korea that this was too large an amount, it wasn't going to be possible. So interesting developments there, and we'll keep our eye on the fact sheet. Scott, so let's turn over to you. And there's been so much discussion about the investment vehicle, but there's also some technological cooperation commitments that have been underfoot, and we're interested to hear your perspective about what exactly is being discussed, what don't we know yet, and what should we expect down the line?
Yeah, well, I think, clearly the investment deal, the auto tariffs, that's the main headline of this deal. And, frankly, all of us engaged in the US-Korea commercial relationship are glad to see that they were able to resolve those issues. It's important for both countries to, frankly, be able to move on from the cloud of not having that framework in place, which, as Kate said, is a real priority for the Trump administration. But yes, beyond investments, we were pleased to see, at least some initial additional commitments that were not announced during President Lee's visit in DC when he came in August, particularly in the digital space. And we'll wait to see. I think all of us are eager to see what the final MOU language looks like, particularly on broader digital trade commitments or reforms. But generally, for now, the deliverable is the new technology prosperity deal, which the U.S. and Korea signed to bottom line really strengthen bilateral cooperation in advanced tech sectors, and more than anything, really just to help align the two governments on investment priorities and governance frameworks that, specifically for emerging technologies like AI, but also in things like quantum computing and biotech and next generation communications like 6G networks. If you can believe we're already at 6G, and space exploration and things like satellite systems. So I think it's great for everyone, all stakeholders, including Coupang, that have a stake in the bilateral trade relationship, to deepen ties between the two countries, particularly, of course, at a time when China's influence is pronounced, but also a lot around industrial and commercial cooperation, some of which was announced in August, but, things like large scale investment and shipbuilding and other strategic sectors, even some positive signals around nuclear collaboration and nuclear supply chains, which would be a significant shift in bilateral dynamics if realized. So all of it is encouraging. I think the U.S. government, though, has been clear repeatedly that this is just an initial step in enhancing the broader U.S.-Korea relationship. For example, the tech prosperity deal confirms that the two governments will work together to reduce operational burdens for innovators and technology companies operating in Korea and in the United States. So I think that's great to see. We'll see what that looks like in practice. But I agree. Overall, I think pretty close to best case scenario, considering most didn't think a deal would be possible heading into last week, and including the U.S. Treasury Secretary. And so, congrats to all on both sides that made it happen.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Scott. And we're going to shift now to an area that's also been of interest. and that's non-tariff barriers and some of the digital trade issues that emerged in conversations between the US and Korea. Have there been any specific updates there? And if not, do you think that these types of issues are going to be addressed through the existing framework, or will there need to be some sort of new talks to be able to cover them?
Yeah, it's a good question. Likely new talks, but clearly this is an issue that has been prioritized by the Trump administration and frankly bipartisan members of Congress, Korean regulators, members of the National Assembly, of course, always have a responsibility to ensure that there's fair trade, that smaller businesses, workers across the country are protected from abusive practices and unfair competition in the digital space. But, the question is, what are the right solutions? How do you regulate in a way that either intentionally or not doesn't disproportionately target or disadvantage a certain group of companies, U.S. firms, who frankly are not dominating any sector of the Korean economy, certainly in comparison to some of the chaebol businesses that have been accumulating market share for decades. How do you ensure that, you aren't violating commitments under chorus or the framework that was announced last week to, again, reduce operational burdens for U.S. tech companies that are operating in Korea? And so if you're imposing ex-ante regulations that pre-designate American companies for heightened regulation and business restrictions, how do you square that circle? And obviously this is a model that has been imported from the EU, where the Europeans have been experimenting with digital trade frameworks like the Digital Markets Act, like the Digital Service Act to target, frankly, American companies. And aside from that being a potential trade violation, and honestly, Kate really is the expert on this topic, so would love to hear her views. But the evidence out of Europe is increasingly that these regulatory frameworks don't work. They don't improve innovation. They don't create jobs. They don't support and spur domestic industry. They hurt consumers. They hurt small businesses. They distort competition in many ways. And so, obviously Korea has long been an innovative economy. And in my personal view, for those of us that really respect the country's incredible growth story in recent decades, I think are struggling to understand why there would be interest in replicating the Brussels model, which just isn't really working with respect to tech regulation. But the reality is that Korea is in many ways notorious for some of the structural non-tariff barriers that have persisted for decades, and that's creating disincentives for foreign investment into Korea. It has irritated the bilateral relationship. It has stoked trade frictions, and I think ultimately it's harming economic growth in both the United States and in Korea. There was just a study folks may have seen released last week or so, outlining how protectionist regulations and disproportionate competition enforcement through the Korea Fair Trade Commission, for example, will cause a $1 trillion drag on the U.S. and Korean economy over the next decade, and directly impacting annual take-home pay for families in Korea and the United States. And so these are real issues, and it's clear that that the U.S. government is paying close attention. I mean, President Trump tweeted about this just hours after President Lee left the White House in August. USTR has been clear in its national trade estimate that these forms of digital trade barriers in Korea are unacceptable. That we've seen members of Congress in the United States introduce legislation that would essentially compel USTR to respond to ongoing treatment of U.S. companies or disproportionate regulation if there appears to be a violation of some kind. Congressional committees have launched investigations into regulatory practices in Korea, consistent with similar inquiries that they've launched in the European Union. So, for Coupang, and frankly also for Apple and Google and Meta and Netflix and Uber and all these American companies that truly care deeply about the U.S.-Korea relationship and who want to continue to invest in the Korean market and support customers and support SMEs and promote U.S. innovation and AI and other advanced tech, that the hope is that they're, whether in some sort of subsequent negotiations or ongoing engagement, that there can be, real structural reform and frankly political will to address these sort of regulatory practices that appear, at least at face, to be way out of bounds with how other jurisdictions operate. But obviously overall, we want to play a constructive role in shaping that system, sharing our experience, other companies' experience, because we care deeply about Korea, as a critical market for our business, obviously, but also as a critical strategic partner for the United States.
Terrific. Thanks very much, Scott. Kate, over to you, and then Professor Lee for your thoughts on digital.
Yeah, I think this is probably an important moment to remind all of us that you can have a deal with President Trump one day and the next day it can change. So I think it is very important to remember that these issues, which were not addressed, but which have been a concern for this White House for a long time, could easily come back to the fore if something happens. The digital issues, frankly, just like agriculture, have not been a focus of this administration since it came back into office the second term, despite some very high-level executive orders and policy proclamations about digital barriers to frankly signal that they're still watching and they still care, even while manufacturing and investments really took the priority. Now, I think that can change very fast. We did see before the first visit of the Korean president, President Trump tweet about digital barriers. I mean, they do remain a concern of his, and although they did not feature much in these discussions this time around, I think they could come back pretty rapidly and very quickly. One stark difference, of course, I think, is the relationship of these tech CEOs with the administration this time around. I think that the tech companies in the US have had a difficult political relationship with both administrations, both Democrat and Republican. But it's clear that the Trump administration wants to support the growth of these US tech leaders. It wants to push back against these digital barriers, which, as Scott said, frankly, are created in such a way. Well, maybe Scott, you didn't say this, you said it more nicely, but they're created in such a way to undermine US technological leadership. And clearly that is not what this administration wants. I think what will happen first, frankly, is that we will address this situation in Europe, and it will trickle on to countries like Korea and Brazil and others, which have chosen to copycat the European framework. Again, as Scott pointed out, for reasons that don't benefit the domestic economy. This is not the trajectory, I think, that you want to see if you want a thriving digital environment in your country. So hopefully some changes can be made. We have some things happening in Europe, however, that I think are going to bring this to the fore. Largely contemplation in France of an increase in taxation on US tech companies, which if enacted, I think has the potential to really bring this issue back into the forefront. We have essentially an investigation and retaliatory tariffs that have been on pause on ICE since the first Trump administration, largely directed at Europe. Those things could be turned on relatively quickly, thereby, making this a bit more unstable in Europe, but having very, very serious implications for other economies that are choosing to adopt similar policies. So my prediction is, this can kind of sit below the waves until something brings this to the attention of the president, and then we can react very quickly. The baseline policy actions, whether it's the presidential EO of the spring on digital policy or these underlying 301 investigations, are fairly easy to turn on. So I think it is probably in the best interest of some of these governments to think very clearly about how these policies impact one nation over another. Whether or not the WTO is functioning, we still do tend to operate under a principle of national treatment. And if the United States, frankly, fairly interprets some of these regulations as much more negative for US business interests, I think it will address them fairly aggressively.
Thanks very much, Kate. Professor Lee, over to you for your thoughts.
Well, thank you. Digital issue is quite important for Korea, and it is very important, contentious topic for Korea-US trade relations as well. We understand that Korea's digital regulation has surfaced in recent Korea-US negotiation as well. So I think given the importance of digital trade and the importance of the power of technological companies from Korea and from the United States as well. So I think the digital issue will continue to remain a critical topic of trade relations between Korea and the United States. I think the digital issue may not be the top agenda issue at the very moment, because right now we are focusing on, again, investment and tariff rates. So all those NTBs are important and have been long-standing issues for two countries for many decades now, but they will continue to be so, and Korea will continue to change its laws and regulations to meet the global standards step by step. So there's a long way for Korea to go. But that said, for now, I think Korea and the United States will probably focus on the tariff issue and the investment issue again, and they will address the NTB issue step by step. And among the NTB issues, I think digital is most prominent issues. As we know, there are a couple of regulations and legislations, prospective legislations that Korea is contemplating, so to which United States is registering its complaints and concerns. So we'll have to see. I think the difficulty for Korea is that on the one hand, the government of Korea is increasingly facing the demand from the public for the regulation of the digital companies for good, legitimate purposes for the governmental regulation. And then they will usually look to the examples of other countries, perhaps from the EU or from other countries. And at the same time, it may lead to some unintended consequences in the market, which means that the US companies may be the disproportionate US companies will be receiving disproportionate negative impact from the new regulation, which could be problematic. So it is in the early stage of regulation experiments, and Korea is just trying to see the US model, EU model, and other countries' model in the digital sector. So I think over time, I think we can converge on the regulatory model, which will satisfy the US companies and the business entities of the United States as well in the digital sector. So over time, I think the two countries will find some compromise ground, but that may take time. So until that time, I think the two countries will continue to discuss digital issue together with other NTB issues on the agenda of the two countries.
Thanks so much, Professor Lee. Really, really helpful context there. And we're going to do a little bit of a wild shift from digital trade to North Korea diplomacy. So there was some expectation that there could be a meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. That would be the fourth meeting between the two leaders. Of course, that did not happen. Although we did see that Kim Jong-un spoke positively about his personal relationship with Donald Trump, and President Trump made a number of remarks that he is open to doing that role again, and President Lee Jae-myung promoting President Trump as a peacemaker. So what do you think the future holds for U.S. DPRK relations and inter-Korean relations? A bit of an inflection point at the moment. So over to you, Professor Lee, for any thoughts.
Well, when President Trump mentioned North Korea a couple of times before his trip to Asia, so the expectation was high, I think, at least several days before his arrival in Korea, that perhaps there's another summit meeting. Fourth summit meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. But it turned out that this time was not, this time they were not able to meet because of the timing issue, to borrow the words of the President Trump. So, but I think at least the discussion of the summit meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un this time is a good starting point for more meaningful discussion between the United States and DPRK. And now, as we know, the Korean government is also supportive of US DPRK meeting, believing that it would bring more peaceful situation on the Korean Peninsula. So I think although this time North Korea responded with silence, but it appears that the atmosphere for another meeting, another summit meeting between the United States and DPRK is moving forward. So we'll have to see, and at least the silence, instead of harsh criticism from Pyongyang, is indicative of what is in store for prospective fourth summit meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim. So we'll have to see. But again, as you can see in Korea, the fourth summit meeting is being received as a great concern for the conservative factor in Korean society. So they are watching the possible development of North Korea United States meeting very cautiously and very keenly.
Thanks so much, Professor Lee. Really helpful. And we'll be watching that space very closely and tracking those developments here at the Korea Society. So as things do develop, make sure to tune in here, and we'll make sure to bring you the experts, just like we have today, to cover those issues. I wanted to end on a bit of a positive note, right? Because these can be tough issues and not always the most positive, but I think there are a lot of success stories and there are a lot of things to be excited about. So I want to end here and talk about what excites you about the future of U.S.-Korea relations, particularly within the sphere of economics. And Scott, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, I think the U.S.-Korea relationship is a long-standing, successful economic and security alliance that's been obviously critical for both countries. There's no doubt that's going to continue. I think particularly after this deal last week, which should enhance ties and trade flows, and that's great for businesses like ours who, beyond any specific regulatory issue or concern, care first and foremost about ensuring that the bilateral alliance is stabilized, that there's certainty, at least to some extent, for investors moving forward. And we made progress last week. I think it's clear that the two leaders, President Trump and President Lee, are building a relationship. Both seem committed to that. They actually have quite a bit in common in some ways as political outsiders, and we'll see if that golf game happens at some point. But I think, post APEC, we can now move forward without the cloud of politically charged trade negotiations, at least this first phase. And I think we've been able to overcome, at least for now, some of the tensions that simmered after the incident in Georgia. And my hope is we can get back to the business of working, very closely on a whole host of issues moving forward, including, of course, the non-tariff barriers that continue to persist throughout the Korean economy. And so, as a company that perhaps has most at stake in helping facilitate economic, cultural, and security ties between the two countries, it's a new era now, and excited to play a constructive role.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Scott. Kate, over to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think what's probably most exciting is that this can kind of move to the next phase, which can be led by Korea's superpowers, which are frankly its businesses. And, the Korean private sector, which is so invested in the United States and so well known that I'm certain a lot of Americans are not even aware that these are Korean companies. And I could list a bunch of them, but I mean, they are ingrained in the US economy. More importantly, though, is the fact that Korea leads in a number of critical sectors of interest to the United States. I mean, when you read some of the 232 investigations, semiconductors, shipbuilding, cars, I mean, these steel, aluminum, this is where Korea has thrived, and I think offers the United States quite a lot. The United States, in return, offers those Korean companies quite a lot. And I think if done well, this can be mutually beneficial for both economies and really kind of move us into the next phase of the bilateral economic relationship.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kate. And over to you, Professor Lee, to close us out.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I think what is exciting at this particular point in time is that now Korea and the United States are entering a new chapter of its alliance. So it is the two countries are now discussing how to cooperate in a new trade economic landscape of the changing global economic landscape. So they are now talking about many different forms of cooperation, again, including new types of investment and new types of trade and new types of regulation. So I think now the two countries are starting to strengthen their cooperation, their economic alliance, and together with their military alliance as well. So now, finally, the two countries are entering a new phase of cooperation and new types of alliance from the experience of the past experience of this year and based upon their discussions for the past several years. So hopefully, I think this will turn out to be a new stepping stone for the bilateral alliance in terms of both economic alliance and technological alliance, as Scott mentioned, and also as well as military alliance. So hopefully this will be a turning point for the enhanced and strengthened bilateral alliance for the two countries.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Lee. And over to Chelsie for audience questions.
Yeah, so we've got one question in here, kind of looking beyond APEC and the trade relationship between the US and ROK, and trying to understand like what the outcome of this summit between the APEC summit has, the impact that it has on the US ROK collaboration on nuclear energy, if any. So that's a question for anyone to jump in on.
So a couple aspects here, right? You've got the SMRs, the small modular nuclear reactors, and then you've also got the US lifting this restriction on nuclear-powered submarines for South Korea. So two different nuclear cooperation aspects. So I don't know if anyone wants to dig in a little bit on that issue.
I mean, from a domestic standpoint, it's clear that President Trump and his goal for full energy dominance by the United States sees nuclear as a critical component of that. I think we saw the GE Vernova team with him, the CEO accompanied him to some of these meetings, announced projects in Japan, signal that this is a new era. And frankly, when it comes to energy, the US is very much in a vein of moving away from some of the renewables into some more of these traditional parts of energy creation. So, I mean, I think it is important. I think it's important, frankly, for what's going to happen in the US, but also the promotion of some of these relationships that frankly benefit US companies are very much on the table.
Well, if I can jump in as well, the nuclear energy cooperation has been on the Korea's wish list for a long time. So hopefully this new discussion and the new consensus between two countries will hopefully be able to pave the way for Korea's enhanced participation and utilization of nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, for its own economic development, and for other purposes as well. So it's great to see that we can see some new consensus forming between the two countries. Again, here also, there's a long way to go to confirm and to discuss and to verify. But still, this is a good discussion, a good start for a new development, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that it's a great point to end on, that there's a lot of future for collaboration between the US and Korea after APEC. And yeah, no, thank you all for such a great discussion. That the breadth, I think, and the comprehensive nature of it tackled actually quite a few of the audience questions we had here. So I'll turn it over to Jonathan to help close us out.
Always good when we can preempt what our audience is asking. So thank you so much to our wonderful speakers for lending their expertise to our discussion today. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching our program all the way to the end. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons. We hope to see you back here early and often at the Korea Society. Our next program is actually in Washington, D.C. It's the Van Fleet Policy Forum, our signature policy program of the year. We're going to announce more details about that. Publishing our webpage tomorrow. So please stay tuned, and we hope to see you there in DC or virtually. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys.
Wonderful job. Thanks so much.